I talked a little bit about my grandmother's neighbor. One neighbor, she moved away. Then the other one, I told a little bit about him. But she had some awful neighbors. The ones next door to her, the dad, I'll say the dad, he was an old man. He didn't like to cover up and wear clothes. He liked to he was an exhibitionist and liked to show people his pecker. As my uncle called him, the weenie wobbler. So when the opportunity afforded itself, he would show it for some reason. I don't really understand it or his mindset, but it got him in some trouble a few times because apparently he was given 2 hours to leave the state of Florida, which is, that means you got in a lot of trouble, and they just got tired of your antics. And he even, like, when my cousin was little, she's a lot older than me, he'd wander around, he'd like to show it for whatever reason, and she was young, we're talking 7 or 8 years old, and my grandmother would tell her, "You don't tell your daddy," because she was worried my uncle would go over there and twist his head until it came off and then go to jail. Personally, having known my uncle, who's all talk, I don't think he would have done anything. He would have just loudly talked about, hey, we would have done something. But I wouldn't have blamed him, because he's always doing stuff like that, always making sure my grandmother could see when he did it. And my dad suggested, he's like, well, if he keeps doing that, why don't y'all just talk to his preacher? My dad always had great ideas like that. My grandpa was like, oh, hey, that's a good idea. So he called his preacher. And his preacher said, I can't say nothing to him. He could sue me for malpractice. And my dad said, well, if you're not going to talk to him, who will? He can just do whatever and it's okay. My dad kind of lost some respect for that particular preacher because he didn't have the nerve to say anything to a guy that was clearly doing that. And my grandmother told through the years how she had nightmares about him chasing her, which I don't think he ever did anything, but he's always giving her stuff. And I remember one time he gave us some cookies that had been at the church and were left over, and my cousin immediately and promptly filed them away in the garbage can. And she made it very clear he's to not come in the house, he's to not do this, that, and the other. My grandmother was really not one to make waves, because so why did you tell us all this? Because by that time I was old enough, I would have went and talked to him and told him to stop. And I wouldn't have went and whooped his ass, because I'm not stupid or crazy, because all that would have done would have meant an assault charge for me and nothing would have happened for him. But anyway, enough about him. Let me talk about his wife. His wife was mean. Before she died, she hated kids. We'd be playing in the yard, not doing anything, and she'd just yell at us for no reason. If you're looking for Santa Claus, he ain't here. We're not doing anything. If a ball went in her yard, she'd keep it. Just generally the worst person. And apparently when they were younger, my grandmother would give her a ride to the PTA. This was way back in the day. We're talking in the early 60s. She'd give her a ride, and she wouldn't want anybody else to ride with them. She needed a ride, but she wanted to dictate who would ride with him, which sounds kind of familiar. But she died, and according to my dad, she was handicapped. Like she had something up with her hands, which he kind of acts like it's an excuse, but there's not really a good excuse for being an asshole. And then there's the son. The son, he was older than my dad, but he still lived at home. He lived at home well into his 60s. Until his dad died, he lived with his dad. Which is not weird within itself, because my grandmother always thought because his parents didn't let him do anything, that's why he was so weird. And he was always into stuff. I always thought this was funny. My dad tells the story. He waited till they left and then broke into their house and worked out. And my dad just couldn't believe it. And my dad and uncle, they don't agree on much, but they couldn't stand him. If he was ever nearby, they would hide so they wouldn't have to talk to him. And another time, he came up in a deacon's meeting at church because he was wearing too tight of shorts, and they were trying to figure out a delicate way to tell him to wear looser shorts or not wear shorts to church, and they didn't know how to go about it. So you know you're really out there when you're a topic at a deacon's meeting at a church. And then the other story is they had a daughter who disappeared. I don't know if she did or not. I've told the story before. My family speculated they killed her and buried her in the backyard, which I don't know. One thing's as likely as the other. Although the mother claimed that she came by trick-or-treating and she tried to find her. But it sounds like, based on the way the people were, the mother was mean as a snake, her brother was a nut, and the dad liked to flash his pecker. It sounds like she ran away for greener pastures, which I'm hoping they did. And he wasn't just like bothering my grandmother. There were other neighbors that said the same thing. They said, yeah, he's pulling some stuff around my grandkids. I mean, they didn't try to hug the problem away like my family did. The grandpa, his granddaughters, he flashed, went over there directly and knocked him upside the head a few times. And then he put up a privacy fence, which led to him getting mad and led to a little bit of he tried to sue, and they got to court, and they mentioned that he liked to flash people, and he didn't think that was an issue. He's like, well, that doesn't mean he has to put up a fence. And they seriously went to court over that. But I got to show you, my grandmother was a great person, but she ended up with some lousy neighbors.